One week before our wedding, my fiancée, Chloe Vance, threw herself a wild bachelorette party. During the festivities, Liam Cooper, a scholarship student her family had been sponsoring, publicly confessed his love for her. Chloe was moved to tears and kissed him so passionately that the room went silent. Where her best friend teased her about whether she feared Lucas Sterling might find out and call off the ceremony, Chloe simply scoffed. She snapped that this was a business merger rather than a romance, and that if I couldn't handle it, her family could just find another groom. Liam puffed out his chest with pride and added that what he and Chloe shared was real love. He claimed that Lucas Sterling was nothing more than a name on a marriage certificate. With a smirk, he reminded everyone that the license hadn't even been signed yet, making me a nobody in his eyes. I let out a cold laugh as I quietly closed the door to their private suite and forwarded the video to my father. My message was blunt, stating that since this was purely a business deal and the Vance assets were now tainted, he needed to find me a new bride immediately. I followed up by instructing my father to keep the wedding date on the calendar as planned. I sent another text suggesting that since Chloe Vance was so enamored with a man who had nothing, we should ensure she stayed poor for the rest of her life. The muffled sounds of their party and the jeers at my expense faded away as I stepped away from the heavy door. I walked back to the private lounge I had booked with my childhood friend, Ryan Thorne. My expression was grim as I messaged my executive assistant to notify the project management team to suspend all upcoming joint ventures with Vance Industries effective immediately. I ordered her to contact our banks first thing tomorrow morning to cancel all corporate credit lines and wire transfers to the Vance family. I also told her to leak the news to the press that Sterling Enterprises would no longer be conducting any business with them. This was the end of our professional relationship, and there would be no exceptions. Without our infusion of capital, Vance Industries was destined to go bankrupt within 3 months. However, a simple corporate bankruptcy was not enough to satisfy me. I wanted to ensure that when the Vance family scrambled for alternative loans to cover the gap, they would be forced to sign personal liability guarantees. This meant that when the company inevitably collapsed, every personal asset they owned would be seized by the banks. Since Chloe wanted a fairy tale love story with a broke kid, I was going to make sure they were financial equals. My father quickly replied with a digital file containing profiles of eligible heiresses within our social circle. The invitations had already been sent out, and canceling the wedding now would be more than just an embarrassment to the Sterling name. It would cause lasting damage to our corporate reputation. I decided that a last-minute bride swap was a far better solution than a public fiasco. Ryan looked over at me and asked if I was really going through with marrying Chloe Vance, noting that being cheated on was a terrible look for a man in my position. Ryan slid his phone across the table to show me a silent video playing on the screen. It captured Chloe and Liam Cooper silhouetted against the city lights as they kissed passionately in front of a floor-to-ceiling window. I noticed that on Liam's wrist was a luxury watch I had gotten rid of ages ago. While it was a minor piece in my collection, its resale value was high enough to land him in prison for several years if reported as stolen. I asked him where he had found the footage as I took the phone and began scrolling through the feed. It turned out to be Liam's own TikTok account. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh because I'd been worried the video I took wouldn't be damning enough on its own. I had actually hired private investigators to tail Chloe since the day we set the wedding date, but they had never found concrete proof for me to break the engagement until he posted this himself. With what Liam had foolishly posted himself, I now had more than enough ammunition to publicly humiliate the entire Vance clan. Ryan explained that the kid was a small-time influencer who had built a following of a few 100,000 by posting relationship diaries on TikTok. He broke into a loud laugh and remarked that the situation was epic. He pointed out that the wedding was only a week away and my fiancée was dragging the Sterling family name through the mud just to get more clicks. I winced at the thought and then silently began to screen record and screenshot everything on the profile. The engagement between the Sterlings and the Vance family had been forced upon us from the start. The Vances had leveraged an old favor and a debt of gratitude that my grandfather felt he owed them. He had never thought much of their character, especially after they showed up with Chloe to demand we fulfill an old and half-forgotten promise. My grandfather had dragged his feet on setting a wedding date for several years. However, 6 months ago, a series of disastrous business decisions left Vance Industries on the brink of total collapse. After being turned down by every bank and investor in the city, they came crawling back to us and pressured my family to finally hold the wedding in exchange for a massive bailout. My personal impression of Chloe Vance could be summed up in 3 words, which were shallow, arrogant, and stupid. She was actually right about one thing, which was that this was just a business deal. That realization made me wonder why I should ever tolerate a fool as my wife. After saving all the evidence of her affair with Liam, I handed the phone back to Ryan. I coolly informed him that the wedding date would remain the same, but the bride would definitely not be Chloe Vance. Ryan blinked in surprise and asked if I already had someone else in mind to take her place. I told him that he would have to wait until the day of the wedding to see who she was. I glanced at my watch and mentioned that I was heading to Sterling Capital the following morning. I suggested he should start thinking about how we could leverage this scandal to acquire all of the Vance family's assets. Ryan said that was a job he would truly enjoy as his eyes gleamed with excitement. I was in a hurry to get home and review the profiles for a potential new bride. Naturally, I ran right into Chloe on my way out of the building. She was holding Liam's hand as they emerged from their private room together. When she saw me, she flinched for a split second but refused to let go of his hand. In fact, she pulled him even closer and walked right toward me with an expression dripping with arrogance. She snapped at me and asked if I was actually serious. She told me to stop following her around like some stalker, just because I happened to be her fiancée. She bluntly stated that she didn't like me and reminded me that this was a business arrangement, so I shouldn't make it weird. Ryan's jaw dropped because he had clearly never encountered this level of pure idiocy before. I felt a sudden surge of anger and reached out to grab her chin, forcing her to look me in the eye. I told her that we should just call it off then, but I would make sure her grandfather was the one on his knees doing the begging. My voice was low and cold as I reminded her that this engagement was his idea and that he was the one who pleaded for it. This wedding was something her family had desperately begged for. I let go of her chin, and Ryan, being his usual dramatic self, handed me a sanitized wipe. I meticulously cleaned my fingers as if I had just touched something absolutely filthy. Chloe looked as though she had never been treated with such contempt in her entire life, and tears began welling in her eyes. Liam finally reacted by pulling her behind him and throwing a punch at my face. I dodged the clumsy swing easily and kicked him square in the chest, sending him flying backward. I shot a cold glare at the stunned Chloe before striding over and planting my foot firmly on Liam's back. He let out a grunt of pain and then gritted his teeth while yelling that this was assault and he was going to sue me. I told him to go ahead and try as I pressed down even harder on his spine. My voice was laced with scorn when I told him I would be out of custody in an hour after having coffee with the right people. I pointed out that if I really wanted to, I could have him locked up behind bars this very second. I leaned in close and asked him what he thought would happen to that fancy scholarship of yours if I made a single phone call. Liam clamped his mouth shut immediately, his face becoming a mask of pure fury. Chloe finally snapped out of her shock and glared at me with red-rimmed eyes. She asked me what was wrong with me, claiming she had simply had too much to drink and he was just trying to help her. She suggested that for the sake of our family's long-standing relationship, I didn't have to pay his medical bills if I just apologized to him. I let out a harsh and humorless laugh while grinding my heel deeper into his back. When she screamed and asked what was wrong with apologizing since I was the one who hurt him, she suddenly lunged at me like a madwoman. I pulled my foot back just in time to avoid her, causing her to lose her balance. She tripped over Liam and landed hard on top of him in a heap. I stepped back toward Ryan and calmly pulled out my phone to dial 911. If they wanted to involve the authorities, I decided I would be happy to do it for them. Chloe scrambled to help Liam up, her voice thick with concern as she asked if he was okay. He grabbed her wrist and insisted he was fine, though his voice was dripping with fake martyrdom. He told her that Mr. Sterling was right to hit him because he had been out of line. Ryan's eyes widened and his mouth hung agape at the performance. He muttered that he guessed playing the victim wasn't just for girls after all. I ignored the both of them and waited patiently for the police to arrive. A few minutes later, two officers came upstairs, and I immediately pointed at the watch on Liam's wrist. I calmly stated that my watch had been stolen and he was currently wearing it. Liam's face went white as if he had been struck by lightning. Chloe was just as stunned and stared at me in disbelief, claiming she was the one who took the watch and gave it to Liam just to mess around with. She asked me what I was trying to do, but I quickly retorted by asking who she thought she was to be giving my things away as gifts. I reminded her that a fiancé has no legal rights to her partner's property until they are actually married. I was completely done with her stupidity at that point. I turned to the officers and told them the stolen item was of significant value and requested they proceed exactly as the law dictates. The stolen watch incident eventually ended with Chloe paying for the damages and offering a formal apology to avoid charges. The booze had finally worn off, and she realized the deep trouble she was in. She immediately called her grandfather to confess everything, and the old man started frantically calling both my grandfather and my father. My grandfather's phone was set to do not disturb, as it always was after 9 o'clock at night. My father simply ignored the incoming calls after he had seen the videos I sent him. My parents had quickly mobilized their network to compile a list of potential brides who were ready to marry on short notice. My dad eventually handed me his tablet to review the options. My father mentioned that while he knew it was a business arrangement, I should at least find someone I could stand to look at. I took the tablet from him and told him I was going to the Vance estate tomorrow to officially end the engagement. I remarked casually that we were actually lucky Chloe was stupid enough to give us such a clean way out before the wedding happened. This way, my grandfather wouldn't even have to get involved in the mess. The original debt was honestly a trivial matter because the Vance patriarch's first wife had simply helped my grandmother get to a hospital when she went into labor. In return for that small favor, the Vance family had received sterling support for decades and had leveraged it into this forced marriage alliance. The benefits they had already reaped over the years had more than repaid that small act of kindness. My father looked relieved and said that was good. He promised to tell my grandfather in the morning, noting that while we had to honor our debts, we couldn't let the sterling name be dragged through the mud. I began scrolling through the profiles of the heiresses and suddenly stopped on one specific page. It was Olivia Monroe, and I was genuinely surprised to see her name. I wondered why someone like Olivia Monroe would even be looking for a marriage alliance. Olivia had already taken over her family's entire business empire and had absolutely no need for a strategic marriage. After graduating from college, she hadn't even joined Monroe Global at first, choosing instead to start her own tech company. Her tech startup was now valued at more than her family's entire legacy corporation combined. There was a saying in our circle that you shouldn't be afraid of rich kids who party, but you should be terrified of the ones who want to prove themselves. Olivia hadn't just proven herself. She had systematically outmaneuvered her 2 brothers and 3 cousins to become the sole heir. The Monroe family wanted to sideline the other potential heirs, but they were worried those who were pushed out would cause trouble. My father explained while sipping his tea that a powerful alliance was the perfect solution. From what he had heard, the entire plan was actually Olivia's idea. I looked down at her picture and let my finger trace the outline of her face. A slow smile crept onto my lips as I told my father that she was the one. I decided I would contact her myself the following morning. As fellow heirs to massive fortunes, we both understood that this was primarily about mutual benefit. I figured that feelings could be cultivated after the wedding, and if they couldn't, it really didn't matter. You simply couldn't expect to have everything in a strategic marriage alliance. The next morning, I informed my grandfather about my decision to break the engagement with Chloe. He mulled it over for a moment before simply packing a bag and having his assistant drive him to the airport for an impromptu vacation. I had my driver prepare the car so I could head to the Vance estate alone to handle the business. Chloe's face was a mask of pure hatred, and she looked as if she wanted to tear me limb from limb. Her parents, Arthur and his wife, looked me up and down with condescending smirks as if I were some unruly child they needed to discipline. I didn't recognize the other relatives gathered in the room. Old man Vance, the patriarch of the family, immediately adopted a scolding tone with me. He told me that he heard Chloe and I had a little disagreement last night. He reminded me that we were about to get married and suggested we should just talk things through like adults. Arthur Vance put on his father-in-law airs and said that Chloe was a few years younger than me and just liked to have fun. He insisted that absolutely nothing had happened with Liam. He claimed Liam was just a scholarship student they had sponsored for years and that the boy had always seen Chloe as a big sister. With both her father and grandfather backing her up, Chloe's arrogance returned in full force. She snapped that they didn't have to explain anything to me and suggested they could just find another family to align with. She reminded everyone that it wasn't like I was her husband yet. She continued ranting about how I couldn't tell her who she could and couldn't be friends with, shouting that she didn't need me anyway. As she spoke, the smile I had been trying to suppress finally broke free. She was truly a world-class idiot for not seeing what was coming. I stated flatly that this was not a simple disagreement and that their precious granddaughter had cheated on me. I informed them that I was there to end the engagement and not to listen to their pathetic excuses. I warned them that their family now had exactly 6 days to find the capital to save themselves from ruin. My wedding date was going to remain the same, but I was simply changing the bride. I took out my phone and used AirPlay to cast the videos of Chloe and Liam's various romantic encounters onto the large smart TV in their living room. Old man Vance's face turned nearly black with rage, while the color completely drained from Chloe's cheeks. Arthur and his wife looked absolutely mortified as the other relatives watched Chloe with undisguised chagrin. I didn't care about any of their feelings in that moment. Every single contract our family had signed with them was legally contingent on this marriage taking place. I told her that she could continue to play all she wanted, but I was done playing along with her games. The shock of the situation was finally too much for the old man. His face flushed bright red as he clutched his chest and collapsed right there in the room. The living room erupted in total chaos, but I simply stood up and calmly took my leave. Once I was back in the car, I called Olivia Monroe, and we agreed on a place to meet later that morning. Just as I hung up with her, Ryan called me with his laughter dripping with malice. He told me that Chloe's boy toy had just posted another update on social media. He warned me that if I didn't break this engagement soon, I was going to be the biggest laughingstock in all of New York. I told him it was already done as I leaned back against the leather seat and watched the manicured gardens of the Vance estate reseed in the distance. I told him to get the funds ready and to let the Vance family know we were officially pulling out of every deal. The Vance estate was a beautiful and classic property. I reminded Ryan that he had always wanted an old-world garden estate for himself. I suggested that this might be his big chance to acquire it. I told him to make a call to the bank and tell them to call in all of Vance Industries' loans immediately. Ryan chuckled and hung up the phone to get to work. Vance Industries didn't have nearly enough capital to withdraw from their new and over-leveraged projects. The longer this situation dragged on, the deeper they were going to sink until the entire company was eventually pulled under. Sterling Enterprises had poured hundreds of millions of real dollars into this deal out of a misplaced sense of obligation. All Chloe could do in return was act like I was lucky to have her. I decided she definitely had this coming. When I arrived at the cafe, Olivia was already there, sitting in a booth with a latte. Her custom laptop was open to a screen displaying a real-time analysis of Monroe Global stock performance. I glanced at the impressive numbers briefly before taking a seat across from her. I asked if I was late, but she assured me I wasn't because she was just scouting a new retail location nearby. Olivia raised an eyebrow and wore a playful smile on her lips. She reminded me that we had met before, and there was no need for us to be so formal with one another. She mentioned that since I knew her family situation, if I was good with the alliance, she could have her lawyer meet us at my headquarters to hash out the details. I agreed and told her we should go right now to hash out the agreement. Her straightforwardness took me by surprise at first, but then I remembered that she was not only the heir to the Monroe fortune, but also a self-made billionaire in her own right. I realized it was foolish to define her by anything other than her success because Olivia was incredibly clear-headed and rational. The terms she proposed during our discussion were almost identical to the ones I had envisioned. After 2 hours of intense negotiations, the final agreement was printed out for us to review. We each notified our families of the time and place for a formal meeting to celebrate the alliance. Just then, my executive assistant knocked and entered the room with a very pale face. Before I could even say a word, Chloe Vance burst into the room and pointed a finger directly at me while screaming my name. She demanded to know who I thought I was to call off the wedding just like that. She warned me that if I dared to replace her at the altar, she would make sure the whole world knew that the Sterling family could never be trusted. Olivia Monroe simply arched an eyebrow, crossed her arms, and leaned back with an amused expression on her face. She was clearly watching to see how I would handle this situation. Her silent message was clear, which was that if I couldn't manage my ex, our deal would be off. I snapped at security to get in here, my brow furrowing in deep annoyance. I demanded to know how we had let this person up here in the first place. I fixed my gaze on Chloe and told her that if she walked out of the room right now, I might show her a shred of decency for her grandfather's sake. Suddenly, Chloe pulled out her phone and aimed the camera directly at me to start a live stream. She yelled to her followers that everyone knew we were about to get married and asked how I could just call it off. I instinctively grabbed her wrist and twisted her arm behind her back before slamming her down onto the small conference table in the VIP lounge. She let out a painful shriek and started screaming at the top of her lungs again. She screamed for me to let her go and threatened to report me for assault. I snatched her phone away while making sure my face wasn't in the frame and quickly ended the live broadcast. Olivia's face broke into a genuinely interested smile as her eyes filled with amusement. To be honest, I had never felt so humiliated in my entire life. My personal bodyguard arrived before corporate security could even get there. I ordered him to get her under control immediately. Chloe's eyes were wild with rage as she struggled against him, yelling that I wouldn't dare treat her like this. She told me I could forget about her ever marrying me, but I simply told her not to worry because I wouldn't marry her if she were the last person on earth. I retorted that I had a severe allergy to stupidity. I found her father's number in my contacts and called him, making sure to put the call on speakerphone. I told Mr. Vance that his daughter was causing a scene at Sterling Enterprises. I informed him that I was suffering from severe emotional distress and was considering buying a trending topic on Twitter to vent my frustration. Arthur Vance's voice was utterly servile as he apologized profusely and promised to be there right away to get her. It had only been a few hours, but he had clearly already received the news about us pulling all of our funding. Chloe looked as though she had been struck by lightning as she listened to her father's desperate tone. For the first time, a flicker of genuine fear appeared in her eyes. I raised an eyebrow and wore a mocking smile on my lips. I reminded her that her grandfather had begged for this engagement, and that I told her I would make her family beg to get out of it. I pointed out that coming to her house in person earlier that day had been a courtesy she didn't deserve. I told her that she and her inflated ego seemed to think she was some sort of goddess everyone would naturally fall in love with. I returned to my seat next to Olivia and waved a hand, signaling the bodyguards to take Chloe to the adjacent reception room. The Vance family was now in complete turmoil. If they wanted to shut me up, I decided it was going to cost them dearly. Once the room was quiet again, Olivia's lips curved into a playful smile. She told me that my taste in women was certainly interesting. I explained that the engagement had been forced on us while feeling my face flush with embarrassment, wishing a hole would open in the floor and swallow me whole. I told her the original agreement was meant for my father's generation, but neither family had a daughter at the time. Olivia remarked that the Vances were definitely a piece of work as her tone shifted to one of approval. She said it seemed like my judgment was sound after all, and that she hoped we would have a very successful partnership together. I suggested we notify our families because the formal terms were things they would need to discuss. I noted that whatever we decided on our own wouldn't officially count yet. Olivia laughed with a bright and clear sound before asking me if I had ever even had a girlfriend. I mumbled that my family was rather traditional, while feeling my face burn with embarrassment once again. I told her that dating had never really been a priority for me. After arranging for our families to meet at an exclusive private restaurant, we waited for Arthur Vance to arrive for our final meeting. To show his sincerity and apologize for his daughter, he brought a deed for a prime piece of land. I accepted the asset without any hesitation. After sending Chloe and her father on their way, I saw it was already nearly dinner time. Olivia and I decided to head to the restaurant to wait for our families to join us. Our parents were acquainted, but not particularly close. Olivia's grandfather was a true character who was wise, sharp, and didn't have a single trace of chauvinism in him. He had been Olivia's biggest champion when she took over the company by pushing back against the rest of the family. He read over our preliminary agreement and added a single clause to it. He insisted that any future children we had, regardless of their gender, would receive 5% of the shares from both family empires. Neither set of our parents had any objections to the term. They signed the papers without a fuss, and after dinner, we began to leave. Olivia glanced at her watch and asked if I happened to have my ID on me. She noted that it was still early and suggested we might as well go get our marriage license while we were already out. After securing our marriage license, Olivia and I went back to the Sterling headquarters. We sat down to discuss the wedding details because a merger between our families was a major event. Olivia was nothing like Chloe, and I was determined to give her the respect and the grand ceremony she truly deserved. I showed her the new wedding plan and mentioned that the venue would be at the Sterling family's private estate in Westchester. I asked her to see if she had any issues with the arrangements. I pushed the portfolio across the table toward her. I explained that a custom gown was out of the question on such a short timeline, but I had a connection with the top designer. I suggested we purchase his masterpiece directly, which was a dress called the Dream Queen. It was a one-of-a-kind and globally exclusive piece, and I felt a strange sense of anticipation at the thought of her wearing it. The original wedding with Chloe had been planned for a 6-star hotel, which was hardly a step down in quality. However, the family estate was different because we only used it for the most significant family events. Olivia smiled as she opened the portfolio. She told me the location was perfect and that the design for the ceremony was very creative. She paused for a moment and added that she absolutely loved the dress. She pushed the book back to me while looking genuinely pleased with everything. She said she was sure it would be a memorable wedding. I replied that, of course, it would be, as a smile broke across my own face. I told her that we would be the best partners in both business and in life. That evening after dinner, I dropped her off at her penthouse. My father called me to report that Old Man Vance was in a coma. He said the entire Vance family had showed up at our house demanding some kind of compensation. He had security throw them out and warned me that they would probably come looking for me next. I told him I understood and advised him my mom to get some sleep before hanging up. I immediately called Ryan to check on his progress in securing all of the Vance estate assets. He told me that the family was waiting for the old man to make a decision. He noted that if the patriarch didn't wake up, they would have no choice but to accept his lowball terms. Ryan's voice was oozing with smug satisfaction as he gave me the update. He reminded me that everyone in our social circle knew Chloe had cheated on me. He told me not to even think about going soft on them out of respect for her grandfather. I agreed with him, and we finalized the final details of the trap we were setting for the Vance family. After hanging up the phone, I began scrolling through my social media feeds to see the latest gossip. Chloe's friends were truly terrible people, especially the ones who called themselves her besties. They were gleefully sharing the scandal online, while she proved to be an absolute fool. When she saw the post with the video of her and Liam's passionate kiss, she actually liked the post and commented that the camera angle could have been better. I closed the app and sent an iMessage to Olivia. I told her that we needed to move up the official announcement of our marriage. She replied almost instantly and said her PR team was on standby. She promised to tell them to release the press statement right now, and I couldn't help but smile at her efficiency. I took a picture of our marriage certificate, capturing both the cover and the inside page, and sent it to my assistant. I instructed her to have our PR department coordinate with Monroe Global. I told her to release a joint announcement about the marriage alliance immediately. The news of the Sterling and Monroe marriage, complete with a photo of the license, sent shockwaves through the business world. Overnight, Vance Industries lost more than half of its business partners. The remaining few would surely cancel their contracts as soon as they saw the news the next morning. The invitations for the joint pre-wedding cocktail party hosted by the Sterling and Monroe families were also scheduled to be sent out tomorrow. Old Man Vance had invited half of the city's business elite to the engagement party for Chloe and me. Now, the entire world knew that the bride was actually Olivia Monroe. Anyone with half a brain knew that the Vance family was completely finished, and so was Chloe Vance. 3 days before the wedding, the gown I had bought for Olivia was flown in from Europe. I immediately arranged for us to go to the boutique for a final fitting. Olivia was beautiful in a strong and poised way, rather than being the delicate or fragile kind. In that wedding dress, she was so stunning that I literally couldn't look away from her. The staff helping her with the long train gasped in audible awe. I told her she was beautiful as I took her outstretched hand, my throat suddenly feeling very dry. I told her she was beautiful again. Even though we were already legally married, we hadn't moved in together yet. Olivia laughed and pointed out that my face was beet red, her eyes filled with a delighted sparkle. She told me that she liked it that way, and I could hear my own heart thumping completely out of rhythm. The dress only needed some minor alterations. While Olivia was back in the changing room, Chloe burst into the VIP lounge with bright red eyes and started screaming at me. She demanded to know how I could get a marriage license with that woman. She kept asking how I could just replace her like that. She claimed she had only played a little game with someone and called me cruel for my reaction. She blamed me for putting her grandfather in the hospital and getting her grounded for 3 days. She complained that her own cousins had been tormenting her because of my actions. I told her that this was happening because I don't like being cheated on and because she was a total idiot. My patience was wearing extremely thin. I snapped at my bodyguards to get her out of here immediately. I ordered them to ensure that she never came within 3 feet of me again. Olivia's female bodyguard swiftly stepped between us and blocked Chloe's path. My own guards quickly entered the lounge and dragged a screaming Chloe out of the room. Olivia emerged from the dressing room with a knowing smile playing on her lips. She informed me that the Vance family couldn't raise any capital and that the banks were calling in all of their loans. She added that several of their major projects had already collapsed. She predicted they would be filing for bankruptcy within a month. She winked at me and said that in a way, I should actually thank Chloe. Acquiring the Vance core assets was going to boost Monroe Global's profits by 50% this year. I told her that we should probably both thank her for being so careless. I spoke as I was unable to stop myself from smiling. The Vance family had made a catastrophic business decision. Out of respect for my grandfather, I had initially only instructed Ryan to monitor the situation rather than actively sabotage them. However, once Chloe so brazenly disregarded my family, I saw no reason to hold back anymore. If the Sterlings were the ones who built the Vance family up, we could certainly be the ones to tear them down. From the sound of it, Olivia had definitely had a hand in the Vance's disastrous decision making 6 months ago. I realized I liked her even more for her ruthlessness. 2 days before the wedding, the Sterling and Monroe families hosted a joint cocktail party. Olivia and I arrived wearing custom-made and matching formal attire. This was a public confirmation that we were officially married and that our families were now formally allied. Most of the guests at the party were also invited to our upcoming wedding. Ryan, who is always the gossip hound, made his rounds through the room before finding me alone. He whispered that he had discovered something very interesting about the night of Chloe's bachelorette party. He asked if I knew why Liam had decided to confess his love to her right then and there. I told him that I honestly had no idea. Ryan just smirked at me while holding up his champagne flute in a mock toast. He promised to tell me the secret after the wedding was over. I decided to let him keep his secrets for now, since I wasn't a gossip addict like he was. We chatted for a few more minutes before a loud commotion suddenly erupted outside the main ballroom. The voice sounded very familiar to me. Ryan and I exchanged a quick look and walked over to investigate the noise. Of course, it was Chloe. She didn't have an invitation and couldn't get inside, so she was screaming at the event staff like a shrew. She was shouting that she was Lucas Sterling's ex-fiancée and demanding to know why she couldn't go in. I walked up and told her firmly that she was not invited by either my wife or me. She completely lost it and started pointing a finger directly at my nose. She yelled that her grandfather might never wake up and that it was all my fault. She even called me a murderer in front of everyone. Her voice was so loud that a large crowd began to gather, including Olivia and several other guests who were watching from a safe distance. Seeing that she now had an audience, Chloe grew even more hysterical. She shouted that if I hadn't come to their house to break the engagement, her grandfather never would have collapsed. She even claimed that the only reason she looked at Liam was because I had driven her to do it. She complained that we were engaged for 5 years, and I never once called her or took her to a single event. She accused me of never showing her any respect. She told me not to dare pretend to be the good guy in this situation. I ground my back teeth together in frustration. An incredulous laugh escaped my lips. I knew that arguing with her was pointless and that evidence was king. I pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and casually selected a call recording to play on the speaker. My own voice soon filled the air for everyone to hear. In the recording, I was telling her that the Johnson family's baby shower was that night, and I needed her to come with me. I told her to get ready, and I would send a driver to pick her up. Then, Chloe's voice came through dripping with disdain as she asked what the point of a baby shower was. She called the guests a bunch of social climbers. She said she was Chloe Vance and didn't go to things like that, telling me I could handle it myself. Chloe stared at me now, with her eyes wide with shock as the recording ended. I stopped the playback and wore a cold smile on my face as I looked at her. I told her that her grandfather was the one who forced this engagement on my family. I admitted that I never liked her, but I maintained that I never disrespected her. I informed her that I had plenty more recordings just like that one and asked if she would like to hear them. I reminded her that business is always about integrity. That was the only reason I had gone along with the engagement my grandfather pushed on me, despite my personal dislike for her. In 5 years, I could say with a clear conscience that I had never once wronged Chloe Vance. I was never some lovesick puppy who was going to chase after her. Her family had been the ones begging for this alliance from the start. I wonder who the hell she thought she was to expect me to revolve my entire world around her. My father walked over with my mother on his arm, and his voice sounded like cold steel. He declared that from this day forward, no Sterling-owned hotel or property would ever serve any member of the Vance family. My father's declaration was the final severing of all ties between the Sterlings and the Vances. Any remaining partners of Vances would now be scrambling for the exits. With 13 banks calling in their loans and Sterling Enterprises ceasing all cooperation, investors were pulling out. The Vance family bankruptcy was now going to accelerate rapidly. On the wedding day, the Sterling estate was filled with prestigious guests. The heads of nearly every major company in the New York business world were there to witness my marriage to Olivia Monroe. Naturally, the Vance family was not invited. The ceremony went off without a single hitch. Afterward, Olivia and I changed into new outfits to greet our guests. In her custom-tailored dress, Olivia possessed a different and utterly captivating kind of beauty. After an afternoon of receiving compliments about what a perfect couple we were and enjoying more than a few glasses of champagne, we were both a little dizzy. By the time we returned to our suite, our spirits were high. It was a perfect end to the day. A night like this was far too precious to waste. The next morning, I woke up and looked at Olivia as she was still sleeping peacefully beside me. I felt a renewed surge of gratitude that she was the one I had actually married. Just then, my phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. That guy was clearly unable to stand seeing me so happy. He sent a video where Olivia and Liam Cooper were sitting in the corner of a coffee shop, deep in conversation. The video was shot from a distance, so I couldn't hear a word of what they were saying. I quietly slipped out of bed and went to my study to call Ryan. I asked him if he had done this on purpose, but he just replied with a sly chuckle and said not at all. He told me he just wanted me to know that my wife had her eye on me for a long time. He suggested I should just ask her about it since honesty is important between a husband and wife. He laughed again and told me I might be surprised by the answer. I hung up and replayed the video, my eyes catching the digital clock projected on the coffee shop wall. The date was 8 months ago. It was exactly the day after Old Man Vance had cornered my grandfather at his birthday party. He had demanded to know when the wedding for Chloe and me would finally be held. Remembering Ryan's hint, I couldn't help but smile to myself. Olivia appeared at the doorway in her silk pajamas and asked me what I was looking at that was making me so happy. Her face was still soft with sleep, and she exuded a lazy yet captivating charm. I told her I was watching how my brilliant wife had engineered a hostile takeover of my engagement. A wide grin spread across my face as I spoke. I told her that I was feeling very lucky to have caught her eye in the first place. I stood up and wrapped an arm around her shoulders to lead her to the sofa. I played the video Ryan had sent me. She asked if I wanted to see a clearer version with the actual audio. She snuggled into my arms and unlocked her own phone to find the file. She pressed play, and I saw that in this version, the camera was much closer. Olivia was leaning back in her chair and looked like the absolute picture of calm confidence. She was telling Liam that the money Sienna gave him wouldn't even cover the cost of one of her new handbags. She told him to take her offer instead. She promised him that when he graduated, he would have the capital to establish himself anywhere he wanted. Liam looked incredibly nervous and fidgety in the footage. He finally stammered and asked what she wanted him to do. She told him it was simple and that he should secretly start a relationship with Chloe Vance. She noted that Sienna had already paid him to seduce her anyway. Olivia told him to just wait for her further instructions. She mentioned that he and Chloe had been flirting for a while already. She said Chloe had only been hesitant because of her formal engagement. Olivia then slid a black credit card across the table toward him. She warned him that the Vance family was about to go bankrupt. She told him he could either choose a future for himself or choose a girl with no future at all. It was entirely up to him. Liam obviously chose the future. I turned to meet Olivia's gaze with an amused smile on my face. I asked her when she had first set her sights on me. She had at least 5 other potential heirs she could have backed for an alliance. Choosing me was the surest way to secure her own position. It also meant that if we had children, she wouldn't have to worry about them. She wouldn't have to worry about protecting them from messy internal family politics. For a sole heiress in a family filled with ambitious brothers and cousins, marrying out was always a dangerous game. Monroe Global was worth around $40 billion at the time. Her personal assets were over $50 billion and were still growing. She told me she decided on me the day she secured her position as the heir to the Monroe fortune. She added that if we were being technical, the original marriage agreement between our families was actually valid. It was based on her grandmother's good deed rather than that awful old man's promises. Her grandmother had been his first wife and the one he had cruelly kicked out of the house. She was starving on the street when she coincidentally ran into my grandfather. Olivia's smile was very frank as she spoke. She admitted she decided to steal me away not just to get revenge for her grandmother, but because the Sterlings had a reputation for integrity. She knew that even if I fell out of love with her, I would handle it with a clean break. She didn't want to let her brothers use her marriage as a pawn in their power games. She decided to choose for herself. I told her that she had made a very good choice as I leaned in to hug her, a genuine laugh escaping my lips. She whispered back that I was damn right about that. Our 10-day honeymoon eventually ended, and Old Man Vance still hadn't woken up from his coma. Vance Industries was in a state of total chaos. Employees were polishing their resumes and jumping ship as fast as they could. The most talented ones had already found new positions elsewhere. Sterling Enterprises and Monroe Global had actually hired quite a few of them. I had just finished a meeting about the acquisition of Vance Industries when the Vance family suddenly showed up at my office. They were dragging Chloe with them to offer an apology. The security guards on the ground floor hadn't been able to stop them, so my assistant had to put them in a reception room. They pleaded with me, saying that Chloe had just made a foolish mistake. They asked if for the sake of our family's long friendship, I could please help the Vance family one last time. Arthur Vance's tone was absolutely pathetic. He looked even more stooped and defeated than the last time he had come to retrieve his daughter. Chloe stood there with her head down, her cheeks looking red and swollen. Before I could even speak, Arthur slapped Chloe hard across the face. He barked at her to apologize to Mr. Sterling right now. He yelled at her for being engaged while still messing around with someone else. He asked her if that was really what they had taught her. I frowned because I was deeply annoyed by the display. I told Mr. Vance that I had no idea what he was talking about. I reminded him that I was a married man and asked him to please stop bringing up that old engagement because I love my wife. I told him that when they upset her, it only made me want to make them even more upset. Seeing that the pity play wasn't working, Arthur started talking about the supposed friendship between our grandfathers. He claimed that our families went way back. He said I didn't even have to invest any more money myself. He just wanted me to act as a guarantor so the banks would stop calling in their loans. I thought to myself that if it weren't for them shamelessly forcing us to honor that old promise, Vance Industries never would have grown so quickly anyway. I interrupted him because my patience was completely gone. My entire family was sick of this so-called alliance and the Vance family's leech-like behavior. I told him that when equals merge, it is a marriage, but when one is propping up the other, it is just charity. If it hadn't been for that cursed engagement, my family never would have provided them with targeted financial aid, as if we were some government program. I let out a derisive laugh and called for my assistant to come in. I told her to escort them out of the building. I gave orders that from now on, no one from the Vance family was to be allowed upstairs unless it was for official business. I told her to call the police if they tried to force their way in again. The Vance family members were then herded out of the reception room. They all glared at Chloe as if she were their mortal enemy, and in a way, she truly was. Their life of luxury was officially over. I knew that to ruin someone's finances was often seen as being as bad as murdering their parents. The same cousins who had smirked at her before were now turning on her. Since the day I broke the engagement, they had been sending me videos of themselves berating and abusing Chloe. It was all a pathetic attempt to appease me. They would say things like, "Mr. Sterling, you see we have dealt with Chloe, so can you please help our family one more time?" I watched the videos and immediately forwarded them to the police. With the Vances already in hot water, a visit from the cops was the last thing they needed. The added stress was finally enough to make old man Vance suffer another setback. He had briefly regained consciousness, but quickly relapsed into a coma. Arthur Vance was at his wit's end and went begging to Ryan for help. Ryan, who had his eye on the Vance family estate, told him he would consider it only if Arthur used the estate as collateral. Arthur signed the papers without a second thought. Ryan told me on the phone that he thought the Vances could start planning the old man's funeral now. He laughed and noted how the patriarch had schemed his way into the upper class originally. He had achieved everything with my family's help, only to have a bunch of kids and grandkids who did nothing but sabotage him. I told Ryan to keep up the good work. Moments after we hung up, the private investigator I had watching Liam sent me a new video. It turned out that Liam and Chloe's best friend, Sienna, were secretly living together. He had taken $5 million from my wife, and instead of planning for his future, he was focused on being a kept man for Sienna. It was clearly hard for him to go from luxury back to simplicity. To maintain his lavish lifestyle, Liam had sold off all the luxury goods Chloe had given him. I anonymously forwarded the video to Chloe along with a piece of advice. I suggested she get a marriage license with Liam so she could move out of the Vance disaster. Then, she could go to her best friend and demand compensation. I told her to threaten to leak the evidence that Sienna was a homewrecker if she didn't pay up. She might have been a fool, but even she could see the reality of her situation now. Her entire family wanted to kill her, and Liam was already trying to dump her. She realized she had no other choice left. For once, Chloe's love-addled brain actually did something smart. She didn't get a marriage license with Liam, but instead reported him to the police for theft by deception. To avoid a criminal record, Liam was forced to return every penny he had ever taken from her. Knowing that Chloe now had a small fortune, I anonymously tipped off her cousins about the cash. Less than an hour later, the private investigator sent me a video of the Vance siblings and cousins physically fighting over the money. I thought to myself that this was more like it, and if they were going down, they should all go down together. A week later, Vance Industries officially began bankruptcy proceedings. Ryan, holding the investment contract, joined the other creditors in petitioning the court. They successfully petitioned to freeze all of the Vance family's real estate and bank accounts. Old man Vance woke up again only to hear that even the family estate had been mortgaged. The news caused him to have a final and fatal stroke. This time, he never opened his eyes again. After the funeral, Chloe's cousin hastily married some second-rate rich kid to escape the mess. Chloe's reputation was now so toxic because her ex-best friend was spreading rumors about her affair everywhere. It was so bad that not even the wannabe rich kids would touch her. The entire Vance clan was eventually forced to move out of the estate. The brothers fought viciously with one another, blaming each other for their collective downfall. The money Chloe had clawed back from Liam ended up in her parents' hands. However, since they were both senior executives involved in the company's disastrous decisions, the money was frozen the moment it hit their account. It was almost painful to watch such level of stupidity. The three of them were reduced to living on whatever spare change was left in Chloe's Venmo account. They were crammed into a tiny shared apartment, and Chloe quickly realized she couldn't handle the lifestyle. She took the evidence of Liam's affair with Sienna and threatened him with it. She demanded that he get money from Sienna to support her and her parents. Ryan told me it was brilliant, absolutely brilliant, as he marveled at the latest report from the investigator. He clicked his tongue and wondered how a man as shrewd as Old Man Vance could have descendants who were all dumber than a box of rocks. I explained that his second wife had been a mistress who schemed her way into the family. I pulled a bottle of water from the mini fridge for Ryan as I booted up my computer to review the Vance asset list. I told him that the first wife, the one who had suffered with the patriarch for over a decade, had been kicked out of the house. He discarded her the moment he got a taste of money from our family. That was the real reason my grandfather never respected him or anyone else in the Vance family. We continued poring over the Vance financial records. They had tried to model their management style on Sterling Enterprises, but there was one crucial lesson they never learned. They failed to keep business and personal accounts separate. Their family expenses were a complete and tangled mess. They sometimes paid for things from corporate funds and sometimes from private accounts. When the bankruptcy process finally started, every single one of their accounts was frozen. Ryan told me he was starting to believe what his parents had always told him. Ryan sighed and said it was better to marry a normal person with good character and ambition than someone from a rich family full of illegitimate children and drama. He joked that it messed with the gene pool. I shot him a look and went back to work on the files. Chloe was unaccustomed to hardship and didn't last long in that shared apartment. Soon, she was back at Sterling headquarters trying to ambush me. As a married man, I naturally wanted to stay as far away from her as possible. I wanted to avoid any potential misunderstanding with my wife. I contacted Liam and used his academic record as leverage, telling him to get Chloe and keep her away from me. He didn't dare refuse my demand. Life finally returned to normal for us. My relationship with my wife deepened and strengthened every day. Olivia was brilliant and possessed high emotional intelligence. We were a perfect match for one another. 6 months later, the Vance Industries debt was finally settled. The entire Vance family was now completely broke and forced to scramble for a living. Given the massive size of their company, the bankruptcy should have taken much longer than it did. However, with Monroe Capital acting as the largest creditor, our auditors, legal teams, and liquidation firms were all in place. Chloe and Liam were still tangled up together. I suppose one could call that true love in a twisted way. I didn't pay much attention to any news about her after that. The next time I saw her was months later when my wife and I were out of state playing a round of golf with a business partner. Chloe was working as a caddy at the golf club. She looked completely numb and defeated. A group of local trust fund kids were gathered around her, making rude and insulting comments. She saw us at the exact same time we saw her, and the blood drained from her face. She probably never imagined she would run into us, even after moving so far away from New York. My wife was unable to watch the harassment and motioned for a bodyguard to intervene. I didn't do anything to stop her from helping. However, before a guard could reach them, Liam appeared, also dressed in khaki. He stormed into the group of rich kids and slapped Chloe hard across the face. He screamed at her and called her a slut. He yelled that he couldn't leave her alone for 5 minutes without her throwing herself inside. The rich kids were shocked by his sudden violence and ganged up on him. They beat him up before scattering, giving our bodyguard no chance to get involved. I wrapped my arm around my wife's waist and turned away, pretending I hadn't seen a single thing. I thought to myself that a caddy's salary is around $50,000. In my opinion, they were still far too well off. Judging by Liam's abusive attitude toward her life clearly wasn't easy. My wife murmured that they were never meant to live a life of wealth and privilege anyway. She leaned against me with a wry smile on her face. She told me that when her grandmother helped my grandfather get my grandma in the hospital, that old bastard Vance had beaten her. He had accused her of trying to seduce every man she saw. Later, when he saw how wealthy my grandfather had become, he forced her grandmother to go ask him for a reward. My grandfather didn't know the man's true character, so he invited them both to dinner. That was when the old bastard got drunk and finagled the marriage promise out. After she finished the story, I raised an eyebrow. I asked why her grandfather hadn't gone after him if he had kicked her grandmother out. With the Monroe family's massive power, that man shouldn't have been able to enjoy decades of wealth. She explained that he had run off with his mistress. Back then, finding someone who wanted to disappear was like finding a needle. Olivia shrugged and said that by the time he came back with his new family during the economic boom, he had already latched on my family. He was quietly building his business under our protection. She told me she only discovered that the old man from the stories was that same man later on. He was the same bastard who had abused her grandmother. When our families announced the engagement, she decided that was the moment she would start fighting for control of her. She refused to be a pawn in anyone's game ever again. She looked at me with her eyes shining and told me she was glad she fought for her position. I told her she was right and called her my love. I smiled as I leaned down to kiss her, telling her that I was very glad she fought too. This story serves as a powerful reminder that true status is not found in a title or a bank account, but in the unwavering integrity of one's character. It proves that those who treat a sincere partnership as a mere tool for their own vanity will eventually find themselves bankrupt in every sense of the word. By walking away from the toxic, one-sided alliance and choosing a partner who matches his strength and vision, Caleb didn't just secure his income, he reclaimed his dignity. It is a testament to the fact that the most effective justice isn't just found in financial downfall, but in outgrowing the people who devalue you and building a future where loyalty and excellence are the only currencies that matter.